here with the Exiles. Hope you're safe and well. It's nearly the end of the year, and traditionally what we do across our various clubs in the Exiles is the last lesson of the year is normally a fun and games lesson. We do lots of games with swords and all the rest of it, and I think a lot of groups do this as well. Unfortunately, we haven't, in most of our schools, we haven't been able to do that this year for obviously COVID reasons. So I thought for a bit of fun, what I would do is a video on my favourite actions from each of our sword poster that we see in Fiore's works. These are my favourite actions because they're actions that I like to do for fun, and there's a bit of experimentation. I find that they all work, and I think a lot of them are because of how I like to approach fighting with sword in one and two hands. So it's a bit of fun, and what I'd love to do is hear from other people some of their favourite actions, just as a bit of end of year fun, take a bit of seriousness out of the content of our channel. So I haven't really given these much thought. They're in my mind because I tend to laugh when I do them, or because I enjoy being able to pull them off. So sword in one hand first, okay? So one of my favourite actions from here, and it's kind of a variation of one of the plays that we see where Fiore will come forward and make a cover like this. He'll make a cover on the inside, he'll check the arm, he'll pull the thrust on. I think I've shown this in some recent videos. What I like to do is lean really, really far back, and if my opponent is cutting at a distance, my favourite action is to basically draw that cover right the way through onto a thrust. So I'm basically ignoring their weapon altogether. I'm covering the line, but I'm dragging the weapon right through. And what tends to happen is this will rake right up their body, and obviously my point will land somewhere around their face. That thrust, okay? I like to do this action because it catches people out. People are very surprised because you're really breaking distance quite aggressively, what tends to happen is people start thinking about your thrust than their own action. So it always, quite often it generates a bit of a giggle because people will tend to just immediately shy away from that thrust. So that's my favourite action from here. It's one I'll do from time to time. On the other side, my favourite action here is a bit of a cheeky one. I like to send in a thrust, but just basically letting go with the weapon and just catching it down the pommel. This is a bit of a cheeky one. I think a lot of people do this when they're sparring, but from here it just enables me to have all of that extra distance, and obviously what I'm doing is just throwing the weapon into whatever hole I can find in my opponent's defence. Super easy to recover back onto the weapon, one or two handed, and you can find that everywhere. You can throw it high, you can throw it low, but that sort of cheeky one-handed thrust is something that I like to do quite a lot, and that's my favourite action from this side, is just to throw it forward and just catch it on the pommel. In terms of my two-handed posture, my favourite action will just start in our posture di donna, for example. My favourite action from here, my favourite sort of cheeky action, Fiore says we can do all 7 of our colpi from this position, so all of our cuts and our thrusts. What I like to do is come off the offside like this, basically into a sort of Fenestra type cover, against an opponent that's actually cutting to my left from their right, okay? So most of the time what they would expect is me to come out like this, okay, into some sort of cover or attack of my own. They'd expect me to come off the right shoulder. What really catches people out is coming from behind their weapon into a cover, okay? So I'm basically covering on the outside of their weapon and lining up a thrust to their face like this, okay? And from here, obviously, it's super easy just to put a thrust on the end of that. I really like that action. It always generally has quite a high success rate, and it always catches people out. So I really like that action because it's coming off the back, and that action is effectively a satani from that posture. Okay, so it's a completely legitimate action to make from that posture. Okay. Next posture I'll do is Longa. Okay, this is quite a similar action that I like to do from here. Is I like to steal a lot of distance and make a very, very close range cover up into Fenestra on my left shoulder. So I'll lean into it, I'll get them to send in the big attack, and I won't actually worry too much about the line that they're taking with that attack. I'll effectively just come straight up into a Fenestra type position, a very front weighted Fenestra type position, to steal all that distance. And again, what tends to happen is, as the person's cutting, they will basically just find a point up against their head. okay, and that would be straight away their main consideration. Often when I do this action, it turns into a bit of a mess in terms of grappling and so on and so forth, because from here, really, as I've covered my opponent's weapon, you know, they're going to start putting aside my point with their offhand or whatever, and we're into our grappling distance. So, you know, that often ends up with us just running around on the floor or whatever, but it's a good, fun, system-specific, cheeky action to make. So I really like that one from Code Longa. From Porta di Ferro, one of my favourite actions from here is a very low false edge mezzani as I'm coming offline to my left. This is particularly useful if my opponent is in a high posture on their left, okay? Because what it means is I can actually just throw the mezzani across the middle of their body, and it takes them ages for their cut to get into my distance. So if they're up in that high posture, I'll just cut like this basically, and this generally always lands, okay? If you've got a good awareness of distance and so on, it generally always lands across their middle. So I really like that. I really like that action from there. You can also learn a lot about your opponent doing that as well. Okay, from Porta di Ferro, my favourite action from here is just cutting up against the underside of their arms. Okay, so I'm relying on my opponent having their arms in front of them. You know, in our world that would be a posta longa type position or whatever. But from here, I like to just throw my cheeky satani at the bottom of their arms. They don't target the hands, it's definitely against their arms. The brilliant thing about doing this is that you can do it from lots of different angles, okay? You can come offline with it. If you've had an exchange already and they're just resetting themselves, it's just there just to throw up a nice cheeky action, which again tends to have a really, really high success rate. So I really like that one too. In terms of our Chingalis, my favourite actions from these is actually just the actions described actually in the manuscript themselves, in terms of coming offline and just sending in a big thrust. If you've got a good appreciation of distance and you like me, you like to play just on the edge of distance. So quite often when people watch me spar, they will say that they feel like I'm much too close to my opponent, because I will literally play right on the edge of distance. The actions from this posture actually lend themselves to how I like to fight. So if my opponent is directly in front of me, I'm coming offline and I'm just sending in these really long thrusts from that posture, as Fiore describes. But you can hit lots of stuff from there. You can hit a flank, you can hit a head, but by coming offline, and this is something that I think people neglect to do quite a lot, especially when they're sparring, everything's very linear, yeah, where Fiore's really big about coming offline. By coming offline, you're stealing distance and you're keeping yourself quite safe from your opponent, in terms of your body quite safe from your opponent. So that's my favourite action from both of the Chingali positions, is just that offline thrust up high. What tends to happen is my opponent will cover it. If they do make a defence, they'll make a cover, and from here obviously I'll just be twisting into a Fenestra or something like that. So that's my favourite actions from down low. In terms of posta breve, my favourite actions from here is basically a thrust. But there's something that I quite like to do, and again this is more of something that happens that sort of I'm always impressed that I'm being able to do, is an action where I actually close using almost like a fake thrust from posta breve. So quite often what happens is after an exchange, I will drop into this posture with the explicit sort of intention of basically throwing the thrust back out, knowing that it will be covered. Okay, so we'll exchange. I'll drop back into posta breve just to clear the space and give my arms something to do at the end of an action, and then I will throw in the thrust, knowing that it will be covered, but specifically to close. So traditionally when most practitioners close with Fiore, they're coming from posta di donna and they're stepping forward right foot into the gioco stretto distance. After an exchange, no matter how that's happened, whatever we've done, I will drop the arms back and then throw the thrust forward again, knowing that my opponent will cover it, specifically so that I can then close. I quite like doing that from posta breve as an action. Not very often, but it's something that I do when I really feel like grappling. The next action that I like to do will cover posta frontali. Okay, so again, apart from the obvious stuff from the manuscript, one thing I like to do with posta frontali is I like to use the second cover to close very close up right to my opponent. So for example, I think I mentioned this in a recent video, something that people struggle with, especially against other people doing certain systems where they will cut like this around a cover, is make the frontali cover but actually push it really far over to my left to basically get my opponent to cut around. Okay, so they'll make a cut to my left, I'll throw this out, I'll really lead out with this, I'm basically opening myself up, giving them a massive tempting target, knowing that they will cut around. There's nowhere else to go from here, so they'll cut around, which gives me the opportunity to basically make a cover on this side to really get in nice and close. And that tends to be how I use posta frontali. I really choke up against my opponent to bridge that gap, to basically take their sword out of the equation completely. Okay, because if I've made this cover and then they've cut around, by the time I've made the second one with the step forward, their arms will be like this. Their arms will be really super close to their body, which takes the sword out of the equation. So those are my favourite actions from posta frontalis. In terms of bicorneo, posta di bicorneo, I've mentioned this again in a recent video. My absolute favourite action from this posta, again, apart from the specifics of using the posta itself, probing for holes, being full of deceit, etc., is to actually cut into the posta. Okay, and this has a massively high success rate. So again, I've mentioned this just recently, but if a person's cutting to my left from their right, I will come from lots of different positions and I'll actually cut over into this posta. Okay, and what that will effectively do is beat their sword to ground, or towards the ground, to basically open them up for a thrust. As I say, you can find this from lots of different positions, but it's something that really works and something that is always very surprising to your opponent, okay, because you're cutting right down on distance and basically just completely dominating the centre line. The cut comes in, I catch it, whatever happens here, I'll get it every time. Okay, no problem. He can then react to me, so he can push it aside, and that's okay too. I'm back to what I'm used to being. However, I've gotten there, I'm really close now to bicorneo, yeah? I can drop back and pull it in, no problem as well. It's easy for your opponent to put that aside, but they have to obviously be aware that it's there to do that. So it's something that I really enjoy doing. It's something that has a really high success rate. In terms of posta longa, okay, this is obviously for probing guards, it's for finding holes, it's quite a fluid position, it's an instabile position, so it's quite a fluid position. My favourite actions from here are actually to cut down on top of my opponent. So, I'm too extended for any meaningful thrusting, okay, I can probe, I can find holes, I can step behind it, but what I actually quite like to do from here is cut down on top of things. Okay, so it's quite a subtle thing, but if my opponent starts to move off for one of their shoulders, from posta longa you can actually just do gentle beats to your opponent and basically just wave your sword around in front of their face, for sniping cuts or whatever. So that's my favourite way of using of using posta longa is basically just out here where I'm doing almost micro beats against the thing, and I'm basically just pissing them off. And if they're putting that weapon aside, I'm just rotating it and just always keeping it up by their face. I find that has a high likelihood of really annoying my opponent, so that's always good for a laugh. I think the only posta, I've got 2 posta left. Posta Fenestra, again in stabile. What I like to do from here is one of the actions that is described as part of it being in stabile posta, is I like to throw the point forward, knowing that my opponent is going to defend against that thrust. Okay, obviously if I hit them, that's great, but I'll throw it forward, knowing that they're going to put it aside. And as soon as that happens, almost preempting that happening, I'm immediately turning it into a fendente. Okay, and because I make another recrease and step forward, it basically means that my cut is going to land, and my opponent's going to find it really difficult to pull up a defence. And if they do pull up a defence, it's going to be something like this, which is obviously then going to lead me on to other plays. So I'm here, I'll step forward, and I'll almost, as I say, I'll almost preempt the fact that they're going to cover it, so that I can just turn it straight away into a fendente. Because he's up on his right shoulder, if I thrust at him, I can reasonably expect him to try and cover it. Yeah. So again, I'm threatening at the point, I can expect him to cover it. Now I want him to cover it, so that I can come close and go through. And if he's stupid and he doesn't, well then I kill him anyway. Now, if you step with that fendente, it's a much better action than just trying to do the cut from out here. Okay, because your opponent's going to find it much harder to defend against it. So I'm just basically just throwing it out and cutting around on top of it. The other action, the other posta, is the posta done on the other side. Okay, again from here I can do all 7 of my colpi. My favourite action from here is to move the sword over the top of the head and just thrust straight down the line. And because quite often I'm intentionally doing that from when my opponent is in a position that's not going to have a lot of strengths, i.e. their hands are behind them or they're wide spaced, what I tend to do is lean onto the one foot as I throw it forward to give me that extra sort of 4 or 5 inches worth of reach. Okay, so I come over the head and I just thrust like this, straight forward. Again, I'm thrusting out, it's starting to become almost posta longa, so if they do throw up a defence, I've got the instabile actions of that posta as described. So that's my favourite action to do from here. It's not the only action, obviously, it's just to thrust straight out like this. At whatever is open, okay? And if you work on that action, it can be actually very quick, and you can throw it out very clunky. You can obviously step with it as well. You can do it without any movement whatsoever, just throw it out. But it's my favourite action to do from there because I think it's very unexpected to send a thrust from that position. So a bit of a whistle stop, as I say, just a bit of fun really at the end of a day of filming. So those are some of my favourite actions from each of the posta. As I say, I'd love to know other people's. So happy New Year, and until next time.